Sound check, sound check.
Price check, baby P's, old bloke.
We are the revolution. We want it all tonight. We want to take back what's rightfully ours. We are the
Good morning, one and all, and this is From the Fringes, a program about alternative provocative views, including family issues. My name is Jack Elan. My co-host today is Marius Reikeras, the international human rights lawyer, as well as Steve Evans. Okay, what a corrupt place New Zealand has become. Helping people has become a form of rebellion. Our politicians have let us down, signing the TPPA, not representing our families properly. And we have lost people through mental health and the family court system to suicide. And I noticed this morning that they were honouring on TV the social worker of the year. Social workers should be blacklisted for incompetence and causing family devastation. They don't have an independent complaints authority. What can you tell us about that, Steve?
Well, I've been to the Social Workers Registration Board, and it's very clear that there is no major statutes or acts or laws to protect us from the abuse of social workers that lie and fabricate evidence and then supply it to courts. In fact, you have to go through the medical registration board to be able to remove a social worker in New Zealand. And these are the people that are at the start of causing such incredible devastation to families when people are just making up information. And
So we're seeing incorrect assessments, we're seeing perjury, we're seeing the family left out of the picture through foster care and this sort of thing.
well, perjury in the family court's just a joke.
Yeah. And what about no independent complaints authority?
Well, with the greatest respect to Andrew Beecroft, who is the Child Commissioner, I think rather than actually trying to monitor Oranga Tamariki, child, youth and family, he should in fact take over the executive review panel of child, youth and family in Oranga Tamariki, but he should have legislation to be able to dismiss cases and also to dismiss social workers and their behaviour.
Right, now Marius Reikeras, you have become an enemy of the state, run by the elite judiciary. In fact, your life has been threatened, hasn't it? And in Norway, the child protection agencies make $8 billion a year, stealing 6 children a day, 2,000 a year, including 1,500 gypsy children since 1960. The judiciary supports the state, not the people. Why don't they give the money to people? They are systematically violating the human rights of people. So how can you tell us today about how Norway is reflecting the conditions here in New Zealand?
Well, first of all, I have to correct you a little bit because it's a multi-billion industry.
Yes.
I think we have the Norwegian government is putting in 7 to 8 billion New Zealand dollars into this system each year. So it's obviously a huge business going on. I can really relate to what you are experiencing here in New Zealand, as I see so many similarities to my own country. So it's actually very easy to come here because we could have had this radio show in Norway and debated exactly the same things, because we see that we face the same human rights problems in both countries, even though we are 20,000 kilometers apart.
Right, now Steve would like to honour you with this,
Well, you've already had this
Yes.
on
Yep.
board, but this is not just from New Zealand, Marius. This is from other countries that have been participating with you in Bulgaria, Lithuania, Poland, Spain, and as you know, there's other countries that you've worked with.
Yes.
But we'd really like to congratulate you on all the work that you're doing, especially the recent successes in the European Court of Human Rights, which have upheld the rights of families.
Right, so we're talking about the judicial elite running the country and the rule of law is not being observed. Crown law protects corrupt bureaucrats. We need a Trump to clean up the swamp. Meth is flooding our society and violence is tearing our families apart. So there's major attacks on the family, not only in New Zealand but in 14 other countries. What can you tell us about the effects of this judicial elite and uplifting children around the world?
Well, it's obvious that, as you already told, in Norway, where it has almost the same population as New Zealand, a few 100,000 more, 5 to 6 children are being taken on a daily basis from their capable families. So this is obviously a huge global industry where a lot of people are making big money, or is a profitable business for a lot of people. We're talking about judges, social workers. So it's obviously that's something. We have to combat these human rights violations in a global movement. So we have to stand together.
So a child protection order should be temporary and in the best interest of the families. They have responsibility to unite the child with the family. Now I find that I went to Man Up last night and we had a lot of men who were talking about the child abuse, the violence and everything else, and the fact that they want to be good fathers to their own children. And our prisons are full of people that have been through the child care system and have never dealt with the childhood deficits in their own hearts. So we're actually breeding family destruction, aren't we, in our own country? And
I totally agree. 86% of people that of the prisoners in prison, 86% of them have been through our child protection system. So what are we doing? You know, we're breeding dysfunctional people and hurt people. And remember that most of the prisoners we're talking about are just are generally men. We haven't considered the girls that have gone through and been destroyed by our child protection system. But one of the points I'd like to make to our listeners out there, and I know many will understand this, people believe in New Zealand that the children that are taken are all at risk. The point that Marius is making is that a great deal of them, and we have never done the research because we don't have the ability to, because the records are with Child, Youth and Family, is that many of the children that are taken are from capable parents. That's the issue. And I think that at least from Families for Justice point of view, we believe that there are some parents that shouldn't have their children, whether it be drugs, mental health or violence. But what we're saying is that there are many, many capable parents out there, or grandparents, where the children have been removed and the best interest of the child is not adhered by the judicial elite.
Right. So
that's a major issue.
We need to convict the uplifters in the International European Court and The Hague, the International Criminal Court, implicating all judges and lawyers, those who are guilty of these crimes. They are dehumanizing children, not returning children to parents. So I think that's a good point you make there, that the biological family needs to be protected. And we're looking at section 12, 16, 17 and 25. No one shall be subjected to arbitrary interference with his privacy, family, home or correspondence. The right to marry and receive protection for the family. The family is the cultural and fundamental group unit of society. Once you attack the family, once you attack that intimate link between the father, the mother and the child, you destroy society. Is this what happens, Marius?
Absolutely. I mean, when Steve mentioned 86% of a number of 86%, I can easily relate to that, because we have seen figures in Norway saying that close to 80% of all the children taken into public care are struggling with severe problems later in life. So we see the same thing over there. And as you said, it's obvious that the European Court of Human Rights has convicted Norway for not reuniting these biological children to the families as soon as circumstances permit, because instead they're making this into a permanent state. So they're actually violating the human rights, and they're continuing to violate these
I
human
think
rights.
that's a very important thing that people might have missed just then. In the European Court, they are saying that at the best opportunity, when the children have been taken, they should be returned as part of the best interest of the child.
Yeah.
And that is a terrible failure of
Holding fast to the family.
of Child, Youth and Family, of the New Zealand Family Court,
Yes.
and that is breaching the standard of human rights that the world has set. So when we say that human rights are being violated in New Zealand, if we reduced or returned many of those children from the past and allowed them to build their relationship back with their parents, we would reduce the number of people that ended up in prisons, that we are getting so many in prisons because they are associating with people in the children's homes or the state organisations. And as a taxpayer, I don't want to see more prisons. I don't want to see $150,000 or $100,000 a year spent on prisoners.
Right. Now, Marius, how have you enjoyed New Zealand? What have you seen that has really touched your heart while you've been here in New Zealand?
Well, you know, I've just had a wonderful trip where it has exceeded my expectations. I think I've met a lot of wonderful people who are struggling with exactly the same issues like the people back home. So I think that this has been like a win-win situation coming here, because it's obviously paying attention to the people back home in Norway too.
Right.
Because in these times you have the social media, so you can spread information within seconds, and that is definitely a win-win situation for the two countries to combat these human rights crimes together. And I think that we can achieve a lot by cooperating even more close, and this will, I think this can be a sort of a global movement, and that's what I was Steve talked about, that this will bring a lot of other countries to the surface as well, not only Norway and New Zealand.
Now, going on to that topic, we want to know what actions are we going to take from here. Now, we want to set up an advocacy arm and a litigation court action arm, and we have active as well as silent members. We want to promote prevention, and that's where my Rainbow Ribbons program comes into, a suicide first aid, buddy support, grief therapy, talking therapy, the freedom fighters, holistic healers, trauma. Everyone does a wellness plan, and once they've done their wellness plan, they then become uplifters, wise leaders, insightful seers, humanitarians, messengers of hope, and life mentors. We basically want to set up our own social worker system here in New Zealand, because unless you empower people who have been disaffected in their families, they're still in the darkness, and we need to empower them. And if you're watching today, you need to become an advocate to someone else to help other people with what they're actually going through. So I actually did a mock-up to the House of Representatives and how our petition would look, and I've got here, F4J, charge the government and childcare agencies for violating Article 17, which protects the rights of the biological family. Secondly, we charge Grain Moss, Mike Bush, Jacqueline Moran, Ruth Dyson, Paula Bennett, Tracy Martin and Ann Tolley in the International Criminal Court for crimes against humanity in New Zealand, trafficking in children for financial gain. And thirdly, Families for Justice takes a class action case in the International Tribunal Court over Maori intergenerational trauma and the universal indigenous rights and 5 cases where wrongful uplifts have occurred, focusing on family court suicides, statistics, family destruction. Now, there's a lot of family court, we're concerned about how many die through suicide in relationship to family law policies. What do you think, Steve?
I think it's double of what.
So they're not really telling us.
No, double of what are killed in car accidents is my view. And sadly, we got some very sad news over the weekend that George Dempster took his life, and he was an old campaigner for you'll know him, Jack.
Yep.
He was an old campaigner for supporting the biological family. And, I mean, that's just one of another. We see so many of them. I mean, people become incredibly traumatised of what I've seen when their children are taken. It is an unbelievable, unbearable pain. And unless you've been and lived it, you don't understand it. And I'm very grateful to some of the girls who want to get together and do a lot of work with the Suicide Trust that Jack has, and that is putting a lot of effort into talking to traumatised people who are going through the family court. Because here's the thing that I don't understand. You take the children from the parents and you put them into care and you give them government support, but you give nothing to those parents. Now, if you're an
support services to mothers and
if you're
fathers
an innocent person who's had and a capable parent that has been mixed up in this messy, dysfunctional, lawless child protection system that we've got in New Zealand, right? The risk of them committing suicide is high.
Very high.
Very high. And that's why I say that, it's my view when it comes to children and adults, that at least it's double the amount of people that are killed in car accidents. Now, I know that many of us are victims of this system. And until you have been there, you do not know the darkness.
Okay, so today we're talking to Marius Reikeras, an international human rights lawyer, and we're talking about all the uplifts that are going on around the world, particularly also in New Zealand, and separating children from their mothers and fathers. And we're focusing on taking class action, a case in the UN, highlighting the Maori intergenerational trauma over 150 years, standing up for the indigenous peoples of the world, getting support from international countries, namely the Czech Republic, recognising Norway becoming like a communistic totalitarian system. The state is persecuting a group of people. We have to collaborate with groups to file a petition, approve a third-party intervention plan representing ourselves, getting involved with a local group. Now, how do you set up this local group, Marius, to take action internationally?
Well, first of all, I would just like to say that we have more people committing suicide in Norway related to the child welfare policy than we have people being killed in traffic, so it's the same in Norway as well.
Right.
When it comes to how you should proceed further, I think you should focus on 3 specific areas. First of all, you should start with the families who are affected in New Zealand should start to attack the government by raising claims under Article 17 of the Convention on Social and Political Rights under the UN.
Yes.
Because that applies here in New Zealand as well. That will make it a completely different ballgame.
Protecting the biological family.
Because you are protecting the biological family by attacking the government and not by defending yourself with their laws. I think that's extremely important, and you should support those claims by applying or using the same judgments that we're using in Norway, namely at least the Lubben judgment, saying that
we need a copy of that document.
That copy
It's on Families for Justice.
And that's a Grand Chamber judgment, and you cannot go any farther in the world in the court of law as you did in that judgment. So and that judgment is very clear that taking a child into public care is a temporary measure. It must be discontinued as soon as circumstances permit. So it puts a lot of responsibility on the government.
Do you
That's-
think that we can represent Indigenous rights around the world for all the intergenerational trauma of the Maori people in the Treaty of Waitangi? So the American peoples, they've suffered there, the Indigenous peoples right around the world. Do you see a precedent there for representing Indigenous peoples?
Absolutely, and I'm glad you're bringing that up because I was talking to the indigenous peoples up in Waitangi, and they all of a sudden realized that the
Right.
only way to get some kind of justice is to bring their case to the international tribunals in Europe.
Right.
And in fact, when I was on my way back to Auckland from Waitangi,
Yes.
I got a letter from the genocide group, the UN genocide group, saying that they will come to Norway on 2nd March and
Right.
they will start to
Genocide
investigate the genocides going on in Norway because, as you already mentioned earlier in your program, more than 1,500 gypsies were removed from their capable
Yep.
families in Norway from the 60s until the 80s.
Right.
So I'm definitely gonna make that group aware of my visit to New Zealand, and I will pay a particular attention to how we can combine these genocides, because you qualify in these genocides as you qualify at least for 3 or 4 of these points. So I think it will be possible
Right.
to
write this
collaborate
up.
with indigenous groups from all over the world.
Now, Steve, we have got a lawyer, haven't we? A barrister to represent our case internationally.
Well, I don't. I wouldn't say that at this stage. I think we've realised that the rest of the world is having a similar problem as us.
Yes. Yes.
And I guess that was one of the reasons to invite Marius to New Zealand.
Yes.
I think that the people from CCHR and Mike Ferris, Steve Cook and Victor, who we also gave an award to last Sunday, which was the New Zealand Human Rights Award, which they received for their application to the United Nations for torture against children in Lake Alice for electrification on their genitals.
Yep.
I think that when we consider that they, and Marius is really impressed, I understand, because they're not lawyers, that they achieved that by just telling the truth.
Yeah.
Where the state was trying to cover it up, and so was the rest of the organisation and the people behind it. That we need to work with somebody, but I'm very cautious of dealing with lawyers because, you know, they're part of the
Right.
judicial elite.
We need a pro bono lawyer, a barrister, who's into human rights. Is that going to be hard to find?
I think there might be a silver fox or two that you know, might not be too far away from us.
Because
at the
you were
moment.
attacked for this, weren't you, Marius?
Oh yeah, I've
And,
been
and the
attacked.
Law Society didn't like what you were doing when you were
Karen.
representing in the European Court.
Well, of course, I've been attacked for many years. In the beginning it was difficult, but I've gotten used to it, so it's all right now. But I'm dealing with this for so long, so it's like a.
Well, I
It's more
see
like a
here, I see here an international umbrella. I
But-
see Families for Justice taking it to a new level with our advocacy arm and the litigation court action arm. And we need to have a management team here of everyone working in together and including everyone, Maori as well as non-Maori. And we need to have international representation, and we need to get at a grassroots level people who are signing up to Rainbow Ribbons, who will become the freedom fighters, the holistic healers, the mentors. This is a huge task at a local level and an international level. What do you say to that, Steve?
Well, Families for Justice has always stood by the fact that we're not a gender group,
Yes.
so there are men and women in our groups. We're non-racial and we're non-religious, so
Yeah.
in actual fact we are very lucky to be working with a fantastic group out of Gisborne.
Yes.
And, you
We
know,
have to work together, and we have to
It's-
unite all the people. And if you're out there watching this show, you need to realise we're dependent on you. if you've been separated from your children, you need to come into the light, you need to have your trauma dealt with, so you can be an effective supporter. This is what really needs to happen. And
Well, we're growing organically, and we're just trying to do the pieces that we can do well.
Yep.
And until we can do them well, we sort of trying to find the right people. We're a voluntary organisation. We don't get any money from our government. We don't
Yep.
want any money from the government, because NGOs are usually strangled because they are more interested in funding than anything else. So we want to stay a voluntary organisation, and really we want to represent the parents and the children who are pretty voiceless, and we want to stop the judicial abuse that's been rubber stamping the behaviour of other ministries like
right,
social
now
workers.
let Marius have the final word. Is this possible, this international group, and representing disaffected mothers and fathers around the world? Is this possible?
Everything is possible, and just look how far we have gotten in Norway by just not giving up. And I think
Yeah.
already people showing here in New Zealand that
We can
you
do it.
But you
Yeah,
see this group
gather
of
the people, go
you see,
international.
you had
Yeah.
these 3 non-lawyers bringing New Zealand to justice in the UN court. So
Thank you very much for coming on the radio today,
Absolutely.
Marius. All our listeners, let's be effective freedom fighters and change this nation. So on behalf of From the Fringes, thank you very much. Bye-bye.
You